So, for a little background, I was 10 years old when this took place, and I lived in a smaller city in Northeast Ohio. I lived in an apartment complex, but the buildings were up and down duplexes, and there were multiple of them. I lived downstairs in one of these buildings. My dad was out of town for a couple of weeks, and the night this story took place, my mom was working. I have 3 siblings, and my next-door neighbor was babysitting my 2 younger siblings, while me and my 8-year-old sister, who I'll call A, were at the same neighbor's house, hanging out with the neighbor's daughter. At around 9:30 p.m., A and I went back to our house. We were at home for about 15 minutes until someone knocked at the door. We both just thought it was one of the neighbors. I told A to look through the peephole before opening the door. She did, and she then looked at me, and she was kind of confused, then telling me, "I don't know who that is." I moved her out of the way and then looked for myself. I didn't know who it was either. It happened to be a man who looked to be in his 40s, maybe early 50s. He looked dirty, and he was wearing a red flannel with a jacket over it, and dirty stained jeans with dirty Timberland boots. I backed away from the door, and both me and A were pretty confused. I opened the door, but the man didn't say his name, but then introduced himself as my grandfather's friend. He said that he knew my dad too. Me and A kind of laughed, and then talked to him a little. We were trying to end the conversation so that he'd leave, but he then asked if my mom was home, and me being a dumb kid, I told him no. He told me he had talked to my mom earlier that day, and that he wanted to come hang out with us, and that he wanted to see my mom. I didn't know what to say to him, and I just told him, "Oh well, she isn't here, so you can't." He then asked, "Well, why don't I come inside and wait with you guys until she comes home? I'm sure she wouldn't be upset." As soon as he finished talking, my phone started to ring, and I jumped because it kind of spooked me. I looked at the man, and then told him, "That's probably her calling. I'll ask her if you can come in," and I then shut the door and slowly locked it, so he wouldn't know that I locked it. I also wasn't going to ask if he could come in, but it wasn't my mom calling. It was my best friend at the time who lived a few buildings down from me. Let's call her Jay. Jay had called and told me that her mom was on the porch and had seen the strange man talking to us, and that before he knocked on the door, her mom had seen the man looking through our windows. She told me that her mom called the cops already, and Jay asked me if there was any way we could get out and make it to her house. There was a way. I told Ada to follow me, and we went to the back of our house to our bedroom we shared. I opened the window, and I told her to go out of it, and then I went afterwards. I shut the window, and we went behind the buildings all the way to Jay's house without the man seeing us. When we were then inside of Jay's living room, waiting for the police and my mom to arrive, the police came before my mom, and they talked to us, and they then searched our house, but the man was gone. He was nowhere to be seen, not even around the apartment complex. They said they'd patrol the area and let us know if they find him. The police said other than that, they couldn't really do anything. My mom came home, and she said about how earlier that day, before she went to work, that her and her upstairs neighbor went to the store to go get some cigarettes. My mom took my baby brother with her, and he was in the stroller. When they were leaving the store, a man came up to my mom and said my brother looked familiar, and he asked who my dad was. Now my dad's side of the family is really big, and a lot of people know them, and we all look alike. My mom only told the man that my dad's first name was Frank. The man then said our last name, which my mom didn't tell them, and he asked if that was our last name. My mom then kind of laughed at him and said yes. The man said he knew my grandpa. My mom didn't really say too much to him after that, and she said she had to leave because she had to go to work in a couple of hours. She said she had a really bad feeling, so that her and my neighbor took a few extra turns just in case, but he must have followed her home anyways though. That night, me and all of my siblings just slept in the living room with my mom. I've never seen or heard from that man since, and I'm now 15. A couple of days after all that happened, I overheard my mom talking to her friend about it, and she told her how the next day she went to watch the cameras to our apartment complex, and at around 4 a.m., the man came back and tried to open every window, but they were all locked. I honestly really wondered what he wanted and what he would have done if I let him in that day, or what would have happened to us if he got through the windows that night. That thought really terrifies me. My name is C, and I'm an 18-year-old female. This happened to me when I was 10 years old. At the time, I lived with my parents, and they weren't divorced yet. Some background information. I don't live in the US. I don't want to exactly say where I live, but I live in a country where there doesn't happen to have any serious crimes very often. Okay, so this happened on a Friday evening. My parents and 2 younger siblings had left the house to go shop for some furniture from IKEA. I didn't want to go with them, so I decided to stay home. I was watching some TV for a while when I decided that I wanted some candy because it's Friday and I was really craving some. I had put my clothes on, and I walked down to the store that wasn't even a mile away from my house. It took me like 10 minutes to walk there. So, because there's not really much crime here, it's not really weird for 8 to 10-year-olds to walk to the store sometimes on their own. I got to the store and bought my candy and started to walk back home. When I was about halfway home, I had noticed a guy. He was riding a bicycle, and he looked like he was drunk by the way he was swinging around on the bicycle. I just kind of glanced at him, and he continued forward, but he definitely gave me the creeps. I started walking a little faster, and at some point he had actually yelled something to me. I couldn't make out at first what he was saying, but I then heard some of him more clearly, and he was asking for me to stop. I did it, and I started running. Even though he was on a bicycle, I think he was so drunk that he kind of gave him a hard time to catch up to me. We had a little forest beside our house where you could walk through and get to our house a little bit faster. So I started running as soon as I heard what he said, and I turned to the little wood path, and a little bit after I had turned, he rode right by it, but then noticed me running down the path. He yelled something at me again, but this time I didn't turn around. I then ran home and opened my door and locked it behind me. We had 2 giant windows in our living room where you could see straight out to our front yard. I didn't turn any lights on, and I very carefully walked to the living room. I was breathing heavily, and my chest was hurting from running so fast. I had never experienced anything like this before. I walked to the living room, and I carefully peeked between our blinds out to the front yard. I almost fell backwards when I noticed he was standing just behind our door. He noticed me move the blinds and started knocking on the door. I had no idea what to do at this point. I thought that maybe I should call my mom and tell her what happened. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what I should do. And then by pure luck, our neighbor came home. The guy at the door noticed the car coming, and he then walked back to his bike and took off. When my parents came home, I didn't tell them what happened. I don't really know why, but I just decided not to tell them. This is one of the most scariest things that has ever happened to me. This isn't something that really happened to me very often, but it really did scare the hell out of me. I did tell my mom years later what happened, and she was horrified by it. The following events took place around May of 2009 when I was about 18 years old. I was a senior in high school at the time and was also on the football team. Oftentimes, our school would always host games at least a few times a month, and it would also be this major event that a lot of students attended. Because we had so many games, it wasn't a big surprise we had practice almost every day. As much as I hated football practice, I really enjoyed the sport and liked the amount of support my teammates and coach gave us. One day, I had came home from practice, and I was found a note from my mom letting me know that she went to go get groceries and that she wouldn't be back till later. With me being practically drenched in sweat, I go upstairs to grab my towel and turn on the shower. I take really long showers, so when my parents aren't around, I go mental. I was probably in there for about a good 20 minutes or so when I hear the front door open. We have one of those smart locks which makes a loud beeping noise whenever somebody enters the house. The bathroom is directly above from where the front door is, and I could still hear it even through the thickness of the walls and the running shower. I turn off the shower and put some clothes on and go downstairs to see that the door was indeed open. Figuring it was probably my mom, I go outside to see if she needed help with the groceries, only to find out that her car was nowhere in sight. Alarms start going off in my head as the only people who knew the password were my mom, and as well as our meter reader who comes once a month. Why my dad isn't with us is another story. But I then walk slowly back inside to see if there was any other signs of attempted breaking. I turned the corner into my kitchen, and what I saw there chilled me to the bone. There was a man I had never seen before crouched down by our pantry. He was holding a large knife. By some stupid luck, he didn't seem to notice me as he was facing in the opposite direction. I covered my mouth with my hands and went back upstairs quietly to call the police as well as my mom. I dialed and tried my very best to speak into the phone as quietly as I could, even while hyperventilating. The operator had told me that I should stay hidden and not come out no matter what. While on the phone with her, I hear footsteps coming up the stairs, and not even 10 seconds later, I hear a steady and slow knock at my bedroom door. It was at this point when I began to realize that I was crying, but it was too late because I knew he was coming for me. Suddenly, I hear my bedroom door slam open, and I see the man step inside. At this point, I'm trying not to make a peep, fearing he'll hear me and kill me. What happened next is what I can only describe as a gift from God. I begin to hear sirens in the distance getting louder and louder as they came closer to my house. I then saw him leave my room and hurry down the stairs before hearing the heavy knocks at my front door and someone shouting police. After about a good minute, I run down the stairs and open the door and was greeted to 3 police officers that began to question me while searching the house. My mom also ended up coming home as quick as she could. However, the police never found the man. He had got away scot-free through our breezeway door, which also had a lock. Police still weren't sure as to how he had managed to pick the lock, and there were no other signs of breaking anywhere in the house.